Hello everyone, my name is Kristen Harper and my project is focused on the effects and influences of our digital identities. So to start off, I thought it was important that we define what a digital identity is, or at least the definition that I am using for the purpose of my research. So digital identity is any personal data that exists online and can be tracked back to the person who uploaded it. So examples that can be used are photos uploaded to social media accounts, posts created or even commented on, online accounts such as bank accounts, and even your search history. It also should be noted that if you are a gamer, any online account through that. So if you think about how much people use gaming systems, I personally don't, but I have a lot of friends who do. A lot goes on in there. A lot of comments are made, a lot of chats go on, your purchases, all of that is data that makes up your digital identity. So what is done with this data is pretty much my whole idea and central focus of this project. It's really important for us to note that you yourself are responsible for the creation of your own digital identity. So we are the ones that go in and provide the information that can be used to build us up as well as exploit us. I decided to focus on the good side and the bad side, so a pro and con of our digital identities and what influences us and what effects our digital identities have. So on the good side, we're talking about building community and also a space to experiment with social identity. The bad side more so is going to focus on identity theft and identity cloning, as well as a few points about the lack of empathy towards people. So the first thing with the good side is building a community. Even right now, if you are someone that still pays for ads on any streaming services, Facebook groups is a huge campaign going right now, trying to build up acceptance and trying to build up Facebook groups. So the data collected can help us access these online communities. These communities are for people who share the same interests, and you might not be able to connect with those people another way. For example, one of the commercials for Facebook groups has to do with a deaf community who like to play basketball. So unless you have a direct link to these people, there really isn't a way to find them. So it's a very unique space for us to build that community. Also, in a few of our readings, there is one, I believe it is chapter 14 in our textbook, discusses a group of kids or students, teenagers, who have an online community that has to do with a Lord of the Rings simulation. And within that, they are educating each other and have a respectful community where they have rules and laws. So it's more of a society also. I just find that very interesting, and I think it's really important as a human that we feel accepted by people, and it helps build our self-esteem and even our self-acceptance. Our next point with the good side is it gives you a space to figure out social identity. So growing up, it was me and my sister, and that was it. We weren't exposed to social media yet. There was really no way to express ourselves other than the clothes that we wore that our parents bought for us, and we didn't really have a say too much in what we picked out. Whereas today, kids have multiple platforms that they can show themselves the way that they want to. Digital platforms provide people an opportunity to explore their self-identities, conduct social comparisons, and present their ideal selves. The usage of these digital platforms help increase self-esteem in people because we're getting that validation from our friends. We feel supported in a way that we never could before. So providing community and a space to explore social identity that's going to grow self-esteem are two wonderful, wonderful things about digital identity and putting the data in so that we can be a part of that. However, there are a few things that I'll refer to as the bad side. First up is identity theft and identity clothing. So when we put our data in, we are almost in a way opening the window. We're cracking it open a little bit to be exploited. It just is. No matter how safe, no matter how many precautions you take, the minute we put our personal information online, we're cracking that window. We are somewhat inviting someone in to come take advantage of us. So identity theft, compromised accounts versus hijacked accounts. A compromised account means that the person who created the content still has some access to it. They can go in, change passwords, hopefully do what they need to do before they get completely hijacked. Hijacked means you have absolutely no control over what happens. You are now kind of just dealing with someone taking over your personal space, which in itself can be traumatic, especially if you can't do anything about it. Then we have identity cloning. So we have single site identity cloning and cross-site identity cloning. Whew. So single site means that someone comes in and takes a victim's profile and clones it within that same social media platform. They simply just make a duplicate account. They then take the initiative to friend the same people, and a lot of those friends of the victim don't realize the difference because it's the exact same profile. So they start to accept this friend request, and then the person that is cloning the account now has access to not only the victim's information but the victim's friends. Cross-site identity cloning is taking the profile from one social media platform and then blending it into different social media platforms that the victim has not registered for yet. So this can become a situation where if you're not signed up for Twitter, but your friends are on Twitter, that person that's cloning the account will now friend people that are similar to the one account. And then friends usually are just excited to have their friend on that social media, that they then friend them, which causes them to become victims of a clone as well. This can also be where catfishing, so when people use other people's information to portray themselves as that person to other people, can come into play. So it's very important that people realize that although community is available, sometimes people do not have the greatest intentions behind the computer screen. So it's just important to be aware and to be very careful with what we put onto, what data from ourselves we allow to make up our digital identity. These two things can be such a negative experience for a person that just makes them not want to be a part of the community or not, and it does not raise your self-esteem. It brings you down. You're being used and exploited, and that's never good. Another part of the bad side, to just go off of exploiting more, it's going to be used in exploitive ways. So once our digital identity is formed, we rely heavily on the information provided by the platforms or the media that we are using. The media we use assists in the forming of our opinions on places, experiences, and even people. So when we put in our data, like if you are familiar with Facebook, it'll pop up and say, for you might be interested in this. And it's either ads from things we were talking about with friends, or a search that we just did, or based on places that we have checked into, they give you different examples. And then the first thing we do is we go to the reviews. We read through the reviews, we see how we feel about it. Another dangerous thing about this is that once you start letting your opinions be known, so going off of this picture, I'm focusing heavily on the Trump-Hillary campaign from 2016. Once you start letting yourself be known as a Republican or more conservative or more liberal, those are the posts we're going to see more. So this causes us to sway our opinion one way without really having any actual information from the other side. So we are putting ourselves in a position where we are not fully educated on issues at hand, causing us to think the worst of the other candidate, for example. It also could, like, if you're constantly seeing negative information about Hillary Clinton, you're gonna believe it. You are gonna start to form an opinion around it, and you're gonna start reposting the things about that because you have a feeling about it. It's part of your digital identity that you are letting people know. And building off of that, I have my last point from the bad side. Group identity can lack empathy. So, as I just said, when we are only seeing one side and we trust that media, we're not actively seeking the whole story. We're only listening to the one side. And then we become part of the community that believes that same thing. We start to unfriend people or block them if they don't agree with us or if we want to just stay away from it. So we create this community. So our digital identity is part of a social identity. We are part of a group mentality. When the social identity is impacted in a negative way, we as individuals are strongly motivated to maintain a positive group identity that goes back to what I just said about blocking people who do not believe what you believe or have the same opinions as you. You call it taking the negativity out of my Facebook feed, or I don't want that kind of stuff on my feed. It always comes back to that. Or I don't want them posting on my posts. I don't want them to comment with their negative belief, even though it's their opinion. But we kind of just start to get rid of the people that don't agree with us or don't believe the same thing of us, or we get rid of the people that we don't think should belong with us. This is such a toxic trait in general, but in the digital world, it's almost emphasized. It's everywhere, especially if you are someone that agrees with it. That's all you're immersing yourself into. And that just causes you to lack empathy towards other people. So going back to the Hillary Trump campaign, I have never seen such a lack of empathy in my entire life, watching people fight over things and opinions. And it's still happening today. That negative energy has carried us into 2021. It is still here, it is still prevalent, and that is because it is still very, very heavily focused on social media. It is our digital identity that we just keep repeating and sending out and just keep recreating it. One of the biggest things that happens is our stereotypes. We keep them moving forward instead of working towards fixing them and realizing that we can't move America forward with stereotypes. You saw this a lot. I was very young when 9/11 happened, but I have always been raised in a community where Muslims are bad. And it took me growing up, going to college, reading, educating myself to realize, like, wait a minute, Muslims aren't bad. The people that are the terrorists are bad, and they happen to be Muslims. But because media just pushes our minds in these ways and just pushes us to believe the worst of a whole group, it's just a really toxic thing, and it's part of digital identity. It's part of what we associate ourselves with online. So to wrap up, I just have 3 final thoughts, ways we can help improve our digital identity, as well as just like kind of things that I have gathered through this. So the use of social media is only growing, but people seem aware of the impact digital identity has on a person. After talking with the student through the student interview, talking to them about how young they were when they started using social media and building their digital identity, they even thought they were too young and that they shouldn't have done it. They were in the 5th grade when they got their first social media account. It starts to impact the brain, and I think creating awareness around that is just going to help people. It's just going to help us as a whole. It's going to help our younger generations as well as our older generations. Digital identity is more important than real identity. Empathy seems to be on the rise, though. I would say probably a year ago, when Black Lives Matter really took way and became a prominent thing that needed to be happening and still does today, I started to see more positivity online and social media. I started to see people, just average people, being activists, coming forward, coming up with ideas, saying like, if you can't go to the rally, donate. If you can't do this instead. Help us, use your voice. So I think empathy is truly growing. I will say, based on everything I said, I have my beliefs, I have my own digital identity, so I might only be seeing that empathy on this side, whereas I'm sure there's a whole other lot of people who are doing the exact opposite online, especially when it comes to things like Black Lives Matter, because that was associated with a negative thing towards the group of Americans. So it just becomes a push and a pull, and it's just constant. But that brings me to my last thought, is that we need to educate our younger generations. We need to continue to educate ourselves. That is the only way that we are going to improve our digital identity, and it is the only way that we are going to improve our society. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this. I really appreciate it. This is something I'm very passionate about, and it's just very interesting to see what our digital identity brings and creates.